Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Second Book. The Letter of BELICENA VILLCA. 10th Day. I guess that you will wait, suffered Dr. Sentinel, an answer to the missing question. What would be the next action of the Gellams before the Tartessian might, which was developing out of their control and was frustrating all their plans? This was the answer, very simple, although it will have to be clarified. The Gellams directed against Tartessos, the myth of Perseus. Rigorously, it can be affirmed that the myth of Perseus, as many other legends that lately have been grouped under the general denomination of Greek myths, are really an ancient Pelasgian myth. With some Greek stories of Heracles, occurred the same. For example, with such where the hero fights against the giant Rhenon, to steal his red ox, and which hides the Pelasgians under an expensive symbol, an ancient incursion of the primitive or give against the triple population of the Iberians, of Etruscans, with the finality to conquest the secret of the animal breeding, which they unknown or have lost. And the proof is in that those Agiv, enemies of the Rhenons, were considered relatives of them, since the own Heracles was great-grandson of Perseus. But Perseus was great-grandfather of Heracles only in the Agiv myth. Really, the theme is taken from a Pelasgian myth, much older, of Iberic Atlantean origin, which refers to the adventure undertaken by a typical Hyperborean spirit, to reach immortality and wisdom. In the primordial theme the spirit of Perseus was not Agiv, but natal of the Iberian Atlanteans, that's to say, from a population much more occidental. Because of this his feat was not carried out by a mere mortal king as Polydectes, but from a goddess of the wisdom, Freya, the wife of Neptune. All the names and functions of the gods were changed then, and disrupted, by the populations of the cultural pact, remaining the story of Perseus on its known form. The theme is simple and, when I will expose it, you will substantiate that it can't proceed from any other place than from the Hyperborean wisdom of the White Atlanteans. A Hyperborean representation of the origin, as I mentioned before, was Tul, the estropic core from where proceeded the spirit. In a similar way, for the first descendants of the White Atlanteans, the origin was Punchus, which later was personified as god of the sea, and was identified with the wave. Surely due to from this origin, came their ancestors. This Punchus married with Gaia, the earth, who gave birth, amongst others, to Theseus and Ceto, prototypical symbols of the hybrid beings, half animals half gods. In an undercurrent esoteric, this image alludes to the spirit provided by Punchus, the origin, to the animal son of the earth. The brothers Theseus and Ceto married at their time. Next to a set of hybrid archetypes, they gave birth to 3 women who born already old. The Graia, or Grey sisters, that is to say, the Greys. Naturally, the Graia, or Grey sisters, are not other than the Vrayas, the wise warriors in charge of the custody of the stone plough, and the stone of Venus. They are old because they must be wise, and who ignores the meaning of the lithic instrument will affirm later that, within the 3 of them just had 1 eye, and 1 teeth. Perseus is the idealization of the captive spirit that attempts the feat of the liberation from the material prison. His objective is to discover the secret of the death, obtain the highest wisdom, and find the original couple. Neptune and Freya inspire them to consult the Vrayas, and they, with the stone of Venus, signalize him the path to follow. He must go to a sacred ash forest, and claim for the help of the gods to face with success the death. Is what Perseus made, and is produced the encounter with Neptune. The god informs him that the wisdom is in possession of his wife, Freya, though it is not easy to reach her, because the death interposes in the steps of simple mortals. To smooth away the journey to Freya, Neptune reveals to Perseus the secret of the flight, and give him the sign of the half-moon, that is to say, the symbol of the Hyperborean pontiff, the wisest bridge builders of the White Atlanteans. According to the White Atlanteans, the Hyperborean pontiffs knew how to tend an infinite bridge between the spirit and the origin. Punchus, the grade of Hyperborean pontiff, was confirmed by Vides, the lord of Catawba, when he gave, to those who reached the door of the abode of the liberator gods the cap and the helm. On the forehead of that helm, the pontiffs impress the sign of the half-moon. It is tradition that the pontiffs dressed in this way disposed of the faculty of turning culturally invisible, not by the effect of that attire, of course, but for the wisdom that implies its possession. Neptune teaches to Perseus the language of the birds, and guides him up to the abode of Vides, who invest him in Hyperborean pontiff. In his journey towards Phrygia, Perseus will keep in the hand a crop of crane containing 16 stones, in each one of them is engraved a rune. When approaching to Phrygia, Neptune advised the hero to not stop to look the countenance of the death, what would produce his instant destruction, and to focus in the mirror, that the goddess of wisdom means after the death. Only in this way he could overcome the death. Perseus complies the indications with exactitude and, contemplating himself in the mirror of Phrygia, he achieves to comprehend the death and becomes a man of immortal stone. At his return from the death, Perseus employs the language of the birds to comprehend the serpent with the sign of the origin. Then he acquires the highest wisdom and finds his original couple. Hitherto the most important of the original theme transmitted to the native populaces by the white Atlanteans. It is evident that great part of it, miraculously remembered thanks to the familiar mission, was incorporated by the lords of Tharsis in the reform of the cold fire. The Lydians, later, would contribute in its degradation through the perfection of the ritual form, which consisted in the demential attempt to exhibit externally, embodied in the matter, signs that can only be metaphysical. Of course, that those who would do more to pervert the sense of the theme of the Perseus spirit would be the priests of the cultural pact. And after that the sense was reinstated by the cult of the cold fire, without procrastination, would be accompanied by the Gellams with all their resources, involved in a war that they considered of life or death for the plans of the wide fraternity that they served. In times of the cultural fall the Pelasgians, long before that the Gellams started their sinister displacement to Europe, the original theme was constellated as myth, the names were changing, and the meanings were distorted and inverted. In the Agive myth, Perseus, under commission of the tyrant of Sphyros, for whom he recklessly promised to bring the head of Medusa, he moves to Tartessos, because the monster lives in a forest of the Iberian Peninsula. Such a location is not meaningless due to Vides, the lord of Catraba, was called Ides, Aides, or Hades, by the priests, the lord of Tar, that's to say, of the Tetris or Hell, thereafter Tharsis, Tartessos, etc. Passed to designate infernal places. To this location contributed also, in great form, the Gellams, when they achieved to observe the sculpture of goddess Pyrene and identified it in all the ancient world as the Gorgon Medusa. To the Agive Perseus helps Hermes and Athene, in who is still possible to recognize Neptune and Phrygia. Neptune, indeed, was called Hermes, Mercury, Weton, etc. As Hermes, according to Greeks, was son of an Atlantean woman, daughter of Atlantean, and of a god Zeus, what is not far from the genealogy of the great chief of the white Atlanteans, was inventor of the alphabet, of the lyre and the syrinx, which he exchanged to Phoebus, the sun, by the caduceus which he used to shepherd. It was considered that the caduceus is a rod, with two coiled serpents, that the sun represents the creator god, and the herd the animal man. It is easy to distinguish in the figure of Hermes to the one who has understood, through a language, the symbol of the serpent, that the creator god uses to shepherd his servants. And Phrygia, on the other hand, was known as Athene, Minerva, Aphrodite, Frida, etc. Of her, Greeks said she had born already armed, so, she was, goddess of war, of wisdom, and love. Since his inverse journey to Tartessos, the Agive Perseus started to behave as a clear exponent of the cultural pact. He doesn't consult the Vrayas, but he steals them the common eye. These were sent to Elsis, that is to say, a sacred forest, where he finds the Mealy nymphs, which are not more than personifications of the ashes. The nymphs give him a bag of crane leather, where he will place the head of Medusa, and winged sandals to fly. Hades lent him the helm of darkness, or cap of invisibility, and Hermes give him a sickle of half-moon, formed to cut the head of the monster. But what most reveals this forgery engendered by the priests of the cultural pact is the prevention of the Agivprasius who fears to become a man of stone. Because in the Aegean myth, it is not a subsequent wisdom but the own gaze of Medusa what turns in stone. The wisdom, on the contrary, is not beyond the death put out, with Prasius, definitely independent and unattainable for him. It not allows him to reflect himself in his naked truth. Just puts an objective mirror where the hero will contemplate death without being trapped by it. That is all the help that Daphne gives him. Seeing her in front of the mirror, Prasius will cut the neck of Medusa with a sickle and will give death to the death, not obtaining with this feat the immortality. Athens' mirror is a protector shield. The head of Medusa, obtained in the purposeless feat of the Agivprasius, is placed by the goddess in the middle of the shield, permitting to understand clearly that in this era, after the triumph of the cultural pact, the wisdom is shielded by the death, not existing any possibility for mortals to reach it. Of course, this is only a threat of the priests of the cultural pact, to discourage the quest for the liberation of the spirit. Finally, as the Agivprasius not reached the immortality neither the wisdom will not be able to comprehend the serpent and due to this he was obeyed to kill it too, what he will do at the return of his feet, when he fights against a dragon and releases Andromeda, with whom he procreate a numerous offspring. Finally, taking the risk to be merciless executed by the Tartessians, the Gelms achieved to infiltrate in the sacred forest and spy the ritual of the cold fire. Since that unfortunate day, the Gelms knew that they had found a countenance and a home for Medusa. In few years, by means of their unceasing preach and the countless priests that helped them in all the populations of the cultural pact, it was popularized with renewed vigor the Agiv legend of Prasius. The sons of Phesis and Ceto, the Graia, the Gorgons, and the serpent, that guards the tree of the golden apples, live in a sacred forest of Tartessos, region which in that period belonged to the kingdom of Tartessos. Logically, won't be seen clearly the strategic advantage, which could mean for the Gelms, the refloat and the adaptation of a myth, if we start from the erroneous principle that then no one believed that it already happened. To think in this would demonstrate the ignorance about the ideology at the Gelms. With their revolutionary conception of the unity of God, in the ritual sacrifice, the Gelms sustained the amazing concept that the myths had prophetic character. That is to say, that the myths and every argument coming from heaven or the gods are never accomplished at all, are never totally realized. They had blind faith in that if the circumstances and characters were repeated, the myth, as a prophecy, would be developed again in the earth. In synthesis, they affirmed, the thing that has been, it is that which shall be, and what has been done is which shall be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Thereby, in the gleam, judgment, if it was prophesied, the myth of the Agivprasius this would be infallibly fulfilled. Thereupon the execution sentence that existed over the house of Tharsis would be also accomplished. Of course, we must not be deceived in regard to the activity of a myth, described unto its minor details. Although in the credulous minds of the population, Prasius and Medusa were imagined as real characters, the kings and military chiefs, whose ambition at the loot of Tartessos, had clear that it was treating about representations. In the centuries of the Tartessian expansion, those who desire to emulate Prasius, for example, they knew well that the head of Medusa, which they had to cut meant to destroy Tartessos. Something similar occurred when in the wars of 19th century, was proposed to destroy the bear, alluding to the conquest of Russia, or to humiliate the lion, instead of submit England. However, the fact that a king was aware of the allegoric sense of the myth, not rest in the capacity to act, on the contrary, increases the possibilities of being really accomplished. Who intelligently adopts the role of a character of the mythical argument, interprets the description of the myth as some kind of plan or project to be realized, though is not the character who acts to realize the character of the myth but the own myth that, unconsciously, motorizes the character to fulfill the argument. Who aspires to be Prasius, will end cutting the head of Medusa, even if he believes to be able of self-control, because he knows the allegoric meaning of the character. In this way, Dr. Setonal, the Gelms directed against Tartessos, the myth of Perseus, as a reaction to the economic and military expansion which was developing out of their control and frustrated all their plans. The answer is now clear. In the subsequent century would be many that Perseus, who would attempt the feat to conquest Tartessos, and almost in every case, integrating the warrior expeditions, guiding invader kings or pirate chiefs, reached the Gelms, Hermes caricature that would signalize the abode of the Gra and the location of the Inigai, that's to say, the wise sword. Due to, the Gelms would never forget their main objective: steal the stone of Venus. That would be their part of the booty. The rest, gold and silver, docks and prosperous cities, all would be for the win of Perseus, for the hero of the cultural pact. Was not much what they requested, and would not be few who would answer to their intriguing proposals. However, even by this offensive, which was founded in the universal action of the myth, and that obeyed the Tartessians, to live in permanent war state, the kingdom defended itself with success until the 3rd century, period in which their might started to decline before other rising potencies. Carthage, Greece and Rome would write the end of the history. The Greeks of the pre-classic period were very receptive to the strategy at the Gelms, and that guided them to undertake many conquest expeditions against the Tartessians. From their thriving colonies in Sicily, Italy, Gaul, and finally, in their own Spain, they would have exterminated Tartessos, if they not had to watch their back from the rising power of Rome. The Romans, instead, were always friendly with the Tartessians, and scarcely permeable to the Gellene influence. That must not surprise if it is remembered that through the veins of the Roman royalty circulated the blood of the Pelasgians of Trioria, direct relatives of the Tartessians. Destiny would not reserve then, neither Greeks nor Romans, the feat of destroying Tartessos. Would be a man of Carthage, a Phoenician, a Red or Punic, the new Perseus, who would wield the iron sickle, inverted and perverted symbol of the half-moon, and he would cut the head of Medusa, giving fulfillment in this way to the prophecy of the Gelms. In the 12th century before Christ, when the Philistines occupied and looted it, starts the decay of Sidon, the most important Phoenician city. Begins in this way the might of Tyre, and would not stop growing until Nebuchadnezzar, who after a siege of 13 years, dilapidated it definitely in 574 before Christ, but, in the time, Tyre has been expanded through all the ancient world and possesses colonies, as Gates is, in the south of Spain, in the Sicilian coasts, in the Balearic Islands, in Sardinia, and, since 814 before Christ, in the coasts of Africa, where was founded the rich and prosperous city of Carthage. With the commercial ruin of Tyre, becomes preponderant, since the 6th century, the Carthaginian colony, which has the greatest fleet of the occidental Mediterranean. Carthage reached in history the joyless celebrity to have constituted an amoral society, composed by merchants whose only ambition was the richness, which imposed their commerce with the protection of a mercenary army. Only a few warlords, indeed, they were Carthaginians. The course of the army was integrated by men without homeland and law, that's to say, by soldiers whose homeland was of who paid more and whose law depended of the agreed payment. Although what most impressed always to the observers, in an analogic way to the repugnance that caused in the Europeans in the 16th century, was to know the sanguinary Aztec cult of the palpitating hearts, was the cult of Moloch, a deity for whom they had to offer permanent human sacrifices to appease his inextinguishable thirst of lives. In Tyre, the Phoenicians worshipped very similar gods to the other populations of Mesopotamia or Asia Minor. They gave cult to the goddess Astarte or Tanit, who for the Assyrian Babylonian, was Ishtar, or Inanna, for the Greeks Lo, for the Egyptians Isis, and in other places was called Ashatero, Cybele, Athene, Anatha, Hathor, etc. And also worshipped Aten, who was equivalent to the Phrygian Adonis, and adored Immalkaret, who corresponded to Agave-Hercules, and offered sacrifices to Baal-Zebul, Baal-Sidon, Baal-Zedek, Baal II, Baal-Taz, Baal-Yah, etc. all names of the creator god, who is represented as the sun, as the planet Jupiter, or as any other force of the nature. Was in the 9th century before Christ, when the king Atohobali, priest of Astarte, married his daughter Jezebel, with King Ahab of Israel, that the Gelms infiltrated in Tyre, and tried to unify the cults in the sacrifice to the god One II. Such attempt would not give great results until the next century, after the conquest of the Assyrian great king Sargon II, over Canaan, and after the Gelms moved to Carthage, to officiate as priests of the cult of Moloch. It must be warned that the Carthaginian was the first population where the Gelms established, a part of the European populations that were assigned to them by the White Fraternity, to comply with their mission of unifying the cults. But would be the first and the last due to, according to what they declared, their interest was only to work in the European cults. If they remained in Carthage, that was purely and exclusively to the Tartessian heresy, the necessity to orient pursuers to that population, to cut the head of Medusa and fulfill their prophecies. Was in this manner how, impulsed by the sinister design of the Gelms, the cult of Moloch would reach to dominate by the terror to all the other powers of the government of Carthage. The king, the nobility, the state advisors, the military chiefs, all would end subjected to Moloch and his Gleam priests. Finally, all the families of Carthage were obeyed to offer their firstborn child to be sacrificed in the mouth of Moloch, that's to say, to be thrown in the mouth of a metal idol that guided to an incandescent oven. And there would end their days also the prisoners, the slaves, the accused of some crime, the consecrated virgins, or anyone that the Gelms wanted to eliminate. But the god was never satisfied. He demanded more and more living proofs of the population faith in the ritual sacrifice. His law claimed a fee of blood hardly available. Peradventure Moloch was expecting for a greater sacrifice. Perchance he would be calm with the offering of the whole lineage that insulted him, with its extermination in his name of the lineage of the lords of Tharsis. With the outbreak of the Punic Wars, in 264 before Christ, the Gelms believed that the time to fulfill their prophecies had reached. And not only they believed it, but also the members of the White Fraternity, who sent from Chang Shambhala, two mysterious personages, called Bray and Bishar. They were two priests of superior grade, to whom they gave the title of Immortals. Two priests who as in ancient ages belonged to the same race of the Gelms. The White Fraternity had instructed them the mission to lead their plans. They were two supreme Gelms, due to they surpassed what their brothers of race could have demonstrated in regard to the cruelty and diabolic arts. In other powers, for example, they had the capacity to travel through time, dominion that my family proved bitterly every time when the same actors appeared in subsequent different centuries with the finality to provoke their destruction. In that occasion, Bray and Bishar, placed in front to the Gelms of Carthage, to lead personally the attack to Tartessos because, apart from the race, they were all united by same hate against the house of Tharsis. The general, Hamilcar, would be the new Proceus, the instrument that the myth employed to be developed again in the earth, with the objective to make that this soldier demonstrate before the god One, that he was ready to realize the feat, was impulsed to slay 40,000 men of his mercenary army, who were previously incited to the rebellion when they suppressed their soldier payment. From the defile of the axe, a river of blood ended in this way in the jaws of Moloch, for satisfaction of the Gelms, and as clear sign that the prophecy could be accomplished. Then, the government of Carthage, following the instructions of the Gleam priests, commissioned in 237 before Christ, to Hamilcar the conquest of Spain. This invasion, the last that Tartessos would resist, was the theme of familiar saga of oral legends called the Attack of the 22 Gelms. Tells the saga, that in the year 229, by means of a skillfully and unexpected troops withdrawal, the General Barca achieved to surprise Tartessos asleep, as the give Proceus with Medusa, and subjects it under blood and fire. However, while the soldiers were realized to the carnage and the looting, other facts are happening. Accompanying the Carthaginian army, have reached to Tartessos, 22 Gelems, that's to say, 22 Gillian priests, guided by Barayan Bishar. The myth of the Ogivian Perseus have become real, the prophecy is being accomplished in that moment, and it is necessary to act with quickly precision. While the 20 Gelems occupy the sacred forest, and effectuate the convenient rituals to consecrate items to the God One, the Moloch, and neutralize the magic influence of Pyrene, the immortals Barayan Bishar will go and seek the wise sword. The Gelems are applied to their work and promptly were desecrating the lamp of Pyrene, gathered beside the apple tree of Tharsis, and the sculpture of the goddess. What occurs next obeys that each one commits an evaluation error about the capacity and the reaction of the adversary. The Gelems erred, due to, they not considered the mystical and heroic madness, that the Tartessian Hierophants disposed for being descendants of the lords of Tharsis. And the Hierophants underestimated the powers and the determination of the Gelems, perhaps, for the unknown of the existence of the immortals as Barayan Bishar. The error of the Gelems was to suppose that the Hierophants, unaware as the sentinels of Tartessos, would accept with resignation the loss of the sanctuary of the sacred forest, or that, at most, would offer an armed resistance, case in which they would act in their defense a troop that escorted them. The reality, very different, was that the Hierophants had considered many years ago the possibility that the sacred forest could fall in power of the enemy, and they had already taken a decision for it. They would never permit it. The fall of the sacred forest would imply, necessarily, its destruction. For this reason, when the fire, which advanced through the perimeter of the forest, surrounded and embraced the center of the forest, the 20 Gelems and the guard couldn't do anything to avoid the horrible death. The carbonized skeleton showed, later, that everybody had took refuge under the apple tree of Tharsis and that finally they were burned and consumed as it and the rest trees of the forest. All had been incinerated, in such fire that was carefully planned for years and prepared through a studied distribution of firewood in different parts of the area. When entering to the sacred forest in conquest train, the Gelems would not win an area, but they would fall in a mortal trap. Of course, they would not have never supposed that the Tartessian Hierophants would sacrifice their sacred forest before to see it occupied by the enemy, and this reaction would be taken as a lesson for the Gelems that, hereafter, would continue fighting against the descendants of the Pact of Blood. And the underestimation that the Hierophants committed when evaluating the real power of the Gelems was near to produce the definitive loss of the wise sword. If that not occurred, the merit can only be attributed to the incredible courage of the Vrayas, and to a loyalty to the Pact of Blood which was beyond the death. The case was that some 20 kilometers from Tartessos, over the hillside of the Hill Condil area, was located the secret entrance to a cave that had been conditioned in remote times by the White Atlanteans. Was one of the works that had to be conserved according to the compromise of the Pact of Blood. Naturally, after the cultural defeat of the Iberians, such compromise was forgotten and the cave, occult and solitary, remained abandoned for thousands of years. However, the purifier's effects of the family test that ended with the reform of the cold fire, caused its rediscovery, even if not all, neither in any moment, could enter through it. The motive was that the secret entrance was signalized with the runes of Neptune, and only the pure blood, those who were capable to hearken the language of the birds, achieved to find it. Who not reunited those requirements could not discover it even being in front of it. Well, that cave had been chosen by the actual Vrayas to guard the wise sword. A corridor of Tartessian warriors formed to allow the departure of the Vrayas from Tartessos and to save, in the last moment, the valuable heritage of the White Atlanteans. Many died to realize this heroic rescue, many, that today are immortalized for their courage, awaiting in Kaitaba the moment to return to their battle stations, when the final battle take place, over the earth. Due to their loyal service, the Vrayas, who in such time were the Queen of Tartessos and 2 princesses, could reach to the secret entrance of the cave. In reality they were followed such closely by Barayan Bishar that only one princess, carrying the wise sword, achieved to cross the threshold, while the other 2 remained behind to stop them. and was in this moment when the terrible power of the immortal Gellams was seen, because, even when the Vrayas fought them with their formidable stone axes, they did not need to employ any arm to dominate them, except for their demonic arts. The power of the illusion, in which they were masters, was enough to immobilize and take possession of them. However, the wise sword was already safe in the secret cavern due to the Gellams, who only possessed soul but lacked of spirit, would result impossible to comprehend the runes of Nevton. The familiar saga ends, in this part of the history, narrating the spectacle observed by the Tartessian Hierophants, when they went to the secret cave, after the burning of the sacred forest. Lying in the floor of the base in Condelaria Hill, not so far from the secret entrance, that they didn't achieve to find, were the corpses of the Queen of Tartessos and the Princess horribly mutilated. From such image resulted evident that they preferred to die with honor, rather than betray that familiar mission, and the pact of blood. They had resisted in such way, first the magical pressure of the enchantment of the Gellams, with will of steel, and then the physical torture, the test of the pain. Thereby, surely after realizing the failure of their plans and fearing and struggle with the men of stone, the immortals rushed to kill them and go to the White Island, not without leaving behind them an unequivocal sign of their infernal presences. Before leaving, scalp the totality of the hair, the two dyed braids with grit of burned lime that the Vrayas, as all the initiates consecrated to Lola, wore down to their ankles. And with the blood that dripped from their naked skulls, they wrote in the Phoenician language over a rock something like, "The punishment for those who offend Yah will come from the wild boar." Undoubtedly one of his damn prophecies.